if I'm right about this premise that it's, if not illegal, then it's very difficult to be on the right. Does this stem back to the Second World War and the spectre of Hitler, or is it the '60s, what our friend academic agent calls the boomer truth regime? Is it the '60s liberal hegemony?
I don't think that Nigel Farage and Suella Braverman are outside of that. Right. So I don't think it's that's the problem. I think, and I'm not even sure if it's necessarily the direction of travel, because how far does Nigel Farage really diverge from what someone in the 60s would consider to be liberal?
Right.
I mean, the NatCon thing, I think, was most interesting because I saw, was it Nazir Afsal or whatever his name is, posting how the NatCon guys got shut down, but it's okay because they would have shut people down anyway. And it's like, no, Nigel Farage would not have done that. If there had been some sort of EU conference in London and Nigel Farage was Prime Minister, he wouldn't have sent, or one of his minions wouldn't have sent the police and shut that down, because he genuinely believes in a kind of neutral state and the principle of free speech. But the EU obviously doesn't. And so we can just see, I mean, it's quite a useful thing to have had happen, because at least it should hopefully disabuse anyone of the notion that we're dealing with a fair, impartial, rules-based order. This is about a particular value set that sees Nigel Farage as something suspect, because when he appeals to, I guess what we can just generally term sort of like the Brexit ethics system, what he's appealing to is something that isn't liberal. Right, because the liberal plan is to eventually construct a worldwide superstate in which everyone on Earth is ruled by the same set of laws, and so hypothetically has exactly the same set of civil rights, ends up with exactly the same potential opportunities, etc., etc. But Brexit is kind of based in British nationalism, British exceptionalism, the idea that Britain should be ruled by British people from within Britain. Which is not liberal. It's something else. It's like there'll be people who want to say, "Oh, well, that's fascist" or something else. No, it's more like old world sovereignty. The idea that, how to put it, like the locus of power is parochial to Britain rather than being something that all humans can enjoy, and so it's not liberal. But it's also not something that comes after liberalism, as in fascism or communism or something like that. It's much more sort of medieval in that respect.
Right. It's an English tradition. Is it the Scruton thing again? The oikos, starting from the family and community, then the nation state, and a kind of Burkean conservatism that's sort of non-ideological, something like that.
Yeah. It's based on the continuum of the civilization itself. And so it's made up of the people and the land and the inherited traditions and all of these things that stretch from the past into the future and just have their temporary moment in our present. It's very much all of that. But that's non-rational, that's non-liberal, it's non-universal. And so the people in Brussels look at that and go, wow, that's Nazism, which it isn't.
Yeah. Do you think they really believe that? Or is that just something they say far right for anything they want to shut down? Good question, because it's impossible to read people's minds, but I don't particularly believe it.
I think there is an aspect of it that they believe is, I don't know, intersecting with Nazism or something like that, because it's not wrong to say, well, both ways of looking at the world are both parochial, and so they are not universalist in their outlook. They have a particular constituency and they act in the benefit of the constituency. But Nigel Farage isn't a socialist, whereas the Nazis were socialists. And so Nigel Farage isn't going to create a centralized command economy, a totalitarian state. He's not going to persecute. He's not going to genocide. He's not going to do any of those things. Whereas the socialist mind immediately leaps to that sort of thing. And that's why they're so afraid of Nazis. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the Nazis were defeated 80 years ago. Why are we still talking about them? But because they represent an alternative model of socialism, it always comes back to the back of the socialist mind saying, well, hang on, someone could just use this for purposes that we think are evil. And I guess they could.
Or is it just simply a way of rigorously policing this over to win that, Diane Abbott can say on BBC One, Mao on balance did more good than harm, but obviously no one can, people can't even say something like the family's good. So, there's this massive asymmetry. Isn't that just all it is policing that asymmetry?
The problem is not the mechanism, the problem is the intention that underpins it.